All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us today. Everyone will begin shortly. While guests are arriving, we would like to thank our campaign sponsors. Our premier sponsors are Amazon, Microsoft, and Davis Wright and Tremaine, LLP. And our partner sponsors are Hudson Pacific Properties, Island Tug and Barge Company, and Washington Holdings. And our associate sponsors are Icumatica, the Bielo Foundation, Recology, Starbucks, Union Bank, Vulcan, and the Washington State Employee Credit Union. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Senator.
Perfect. Thank you so much. First off, good afternoon and welcome to the week of lasting change, Wellspring Family Services Spring Fundraising Campaign. And throughout the next week, we invite you to engage with the Wellspring community in a variety of ways, in a way that is meaningful to you. I'm Joe Nguyen, and I'm the state senator from the 34th Legislative District and a proud member of the Wellspring Board of Directors. And it is my pleasure to join today and moderate this discussion. And this campaign has really been designed around what we are calling the 4 pillars of lasting change: finding hope, discovering opportunity, building resilience, and centering equity. 4 areas that encompass our mission to end the cycle of family homelessness while illustrating the amazing strength of the families in our community. And today we wanted to shed light on the central purpose of our mission at Wellspring. And really it's to end the cycle of multi-generational family homelessness with a particular lens on how the COVID pandemic has impacted those who are on the edge of homelessness or actively homeless. And today we are focusing on the pandemic's effects, and we'll leave time at the end so that as you're joining us, you can ask questions as well. And if you want to ask questions during the conversation, please type them into the chat. I'll be monitoring them from time to time and trying to pick those out. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce our guests and have each of them describe what they do at Wellspring and the programs that they lead. So first up, I'd like to introduce Nowishtamai Nightgun. Nowishtamai, would you want to go ahead and kick it off?
Well, hello everybody and welcome. My name is Nowishtamai Nightgun. I'm the Director of Housing here at Wellspring Family Services. Our programs, they span in 2 counties, well actually 3, King County, Snohomish County, and Pierce County. And I'll have Kobe introduce himself.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Kobe Howard. I am one of Wellspring's program managers in the housing department. I currently manage the home-based eviction prevention program and then the Best Starts for Kids program, along with the Davis Wright Tremaine COVID rental assistance program. Alizar.
Thank you, Kobe. My name is Alizar. I am one of the program managers also in the housing department with Kobe. I currently manage the Homeless Student Stability Program, the Arbora Court Temporary Housing Program, and the Seattle Hospitality Workers Relief Program.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we'll just go ahead and jump right in just because it is lunchtime on a Monday. Folks are eagerly engaged. So first off, I really want to set the stage and remind our audience what differentiates Wellspring's mission with the homelessness from other organizations as well. So Nowishtamai, or if you'd like to elaborate on that.
What's the difference between the work that we do in comparison to other organizations?
Yeah.
Was that the question? Okay.
Yeah.
I think, we have so many different services within Wellspring that complement each other. We have the EAP program, we have the Early Learning Center. And then when I think about the housing department and the work that, us and the rest of the housing department does, whether in each program, I think about how we think of it culturally, how we think of it in DEI, how we think of it, not just ending homelessness or putting them into stable homes, but also thinking about how we can create generational wealth and generational knowledge to stop poverty. And what does that look like in our programs? Does it look like centering human services, centering them and centering their stories? So I just feel like there's different aspects of that. And I think, Alizar and Kobe, they would be great at describing, how their programs are uniquely designed for that, because I know Alizar's programs deal with working within the schools, and then Kobe's deals with working within the courthouses, So I feel like each program that we have here at Wellspring, it really meets people where they're at, wherever they're at in their life. Whether it's a family who needs help with academics and also with work, or a family who's experiencing potentially becoming homeless, meeting them at the courthouse and advocating for their cases.
Awesome. Yeah, Kobe or Alisar, if you have any additional thoughts on what makes Wellspring different?
I think Noshima did a great job at describing it, and I would zone in even more on the holistic approach that we take when we work with families. We definitely meet them where they're at, but we look at the entire family and the entire situation and how they got where they are, what exactly do they need, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. We do an amazing job at looking at generational poverty cycles, and we've actually done a really good focus on ending the cycle of poverty and on looking at finance, on budgeting, on how to get into the stock market, how to own a home, how to save, how to have compounding monthly savings accounts, or we really do look at all of that. So I would say that.
I would add that they both hit it right in the head, but to add to kind of what Alizar was saying, and like ending the cycle of family homelessness is like a deeper level of understanding like the history of generational trauma that's kind of directly correlated to the specific client that you're kind of working with. And I think we do a good job at having different programs that have like a wide range of staff, so that there's somebody that everybody connect with on a different level culturally, but then also educating individuals of different cultures about, cultural competency, DI lens, and coming from a trauma-informed lens, so that you're truly able to empathize and build that level of rapport that you need to be able to truly empower and, provide the support that's necessary to the clients. Just to comment on the programming, we do have programming, like specifically one of my programs, BSK, which our contract is to directly work with communities of color. And then it's an intensive case management program that is kind of designed to provide the educational aspects that our school system doesn't really teach you, that do provide that generational wealth and that ongoing support, that community support, building healthy relationships and things of that nature, being able to self-advocate for yourself. So that's something that I would add.
Yeah, that's awesome to see kind of a systems-based approach towards solving these problems, and not just kind of putting band-aids on things, fixing the systemic problems associated with it. So what's interesting is obviously the last 14 months, all of us have been impacted by COVID-19. And Wellspring sits at a very unique intersection between the pandemic and also the work that's already being done as well. So kind of want to explore that a little bit. And when the pandemic hit and our world went remote, how did that impact the housing team from an operational perspective?
I think from an operational perspective, we had to look at the service model and look at our contracts and kind of understand, like, how are we going to meet people when a lot of services are closed down? Families, they usually utilize, public places to be able to, send off their emails, or to be able to meet us in coffee places. So when everything shut down, it was a matter of fact of like, how do we reach families? How do we outreach to them? How do we make sure our services are accessible? And that we're thinking of people that we're serving, but thinking about how we can serve them and meet them where they're at. So it was definitely something that it's an everyday process that always changes, because the trends are always changing.
Anyway, kind of with a follow-up too, is it, how do we ensure that our focus on the quality of service was still there, even though we had a shift a little bit in terms of some of that work? And I think you kind of hinted on it about the flexibility and kind of being able to react to it.
Mm-hmm. I'd be interested. Yeah, go ahead, Alisar.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from the perspective of the programs that I manage, it's hard. It's not that it was very easy or that everything came, in a second and we all just jumped in. But it does take a lot of intentionality, a lot of thoughtful approach, a lot of meeting people where they're at. So we do give the option of having Zoom calls or video calls, but we also understand when those are not, comfortable to families, or when even approaching the idea of a video call might not be comfortable. So we really try to keep as much of the intimacy of the relationship of a case manager and a client, without pushing too much to go on video, or pushing too much to meet once a week if that's hard right now with the pandemic and school from home and no longer working and all of the things. And also maintain that that balance of, you know, let's be here for you, let's be supportive for you, but also not pushy.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and then, you know, as a result of the pandemic, what have you seen, anybody, I guess, on the panel, have been the key impacts on homeless families in our community?
I would say making a choice between housing stability and food on the table. With the lack of employment, the lack of resources that are available currently, then one of the things that I've noticed as a trend has been families making that decision whether or not, you know, do I pay my rent or do I make sure my family eats? And, you know, 9 times out of 10, it's being housing insecure to maintain, you know, some level of stability within the household, as far as like keeping your children, you know, satisfied, and other, like maybe you're taking care of an elder, or other people unaware of the current financial situation, just so that there's not that additional pressure of, you know, stressing out your additional family members, whether that's your kid or an elder that you're kind of taking care of.
I would like to add to that because my program is a little bit different than Kobe's, but the biggest thing we've seen, and which is a really traumatic and sad thing, is an incredible increase in domestic violence, and not just the increase in domestic violence, but in the severity of the domestic violence. And with kids being at home, it's really affecting the entire household and leading to a higher rate of homelessness of families that were not previously homeless but became homeless, and not specifically to like the financial part of COVID, but more the emotional domestic violence part of COVID.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. We've seen that kind of manifest itself in our schools and others as well. What's interesting is kind of what you're talking about, is that people are being forced to choose between untenable positions. And obviously there's going to be trauma and then strain associated with it as well. Were there any other kind of significant impacts that we're not necessarily hearing about in media or across the pandemic story that communities could or should be aware of?
There is one that comes to mind, which is a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds have been dropping out of school from lack of motivation or follow through to go through with school. We've also had a few teenagers drop out because of learning difficulties with online classes. We're hoping that now that everything's opening back up, you know, we can get them enrolled again and get them caught up, but that's definitely been an issue.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that. No, thank you for that insight. Are there key areas, and I guess this is for anybody as well, are there key areas that we need to focus on because of the pandemic? And then Kobe specifically, I understand that you're working with the COVID emergency relief funds and how Wellspring is handling that. It'd be possible to talk more about that effort?
Yeah. So there were numerous COVID relief programs that kind of happened in 2020. To start, we had our first round of rental assistance that was administered through United Way. And that kind of happened as soon as the pandemic hit. We started in April, and it went for 3 months worth of rental assistance. We then kind of went into the eviction prevention rental assistance program by the county. So the King County and the Pierce County rental assistance programs that had a 6-month rental arrear amount that they could provide a census for. In combination of around the time all of that was going on, numerous other kind of programs launched. So we had the Davis Right to Remain, which is an employee-based program that launched at the same time. We had the Edmonds program, which was just specifically for the city of Edmonds, which provided a financial contribution to a specific vendor of the client's choice, or provided a food voucher directly to the household. We had the Seattle Hospitality Fund, the first one, which kind of branched out and created this new Seattle Hospitality Fund that Alizar is now working on. But the first one was a smaller financial contribution to directly to the household in a food voucher, or directly to the vendor of the client's choice. And in a combination of all of those programs, we prevented about 5,100 evictions in 2020.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And then, wow, I mean, knowing that there are so many different programs that you're working on out there, you're probably seeing, a very high level and also ground level view in terms of how these are playing out. Are there any trends that you've noticed in working with people applying for these funds? I know that when we were administering PPP at the federal level, there were obviously trends associated with kind of how do you get access to some of these things. Did you see anything as you were doing that on the local level?
Well, most of the programs were either client assistant where they directly applied themselves or the landlord applied for the complex as a whole. The number one trend that I saw was just like a lack of employment opportunities that were available that like just created this consistent cycle of being unstable. If you can't have employment or you can't find employment, specifically around like your needs, whether or not you have a child that's homeschooling and you need a flexible schedule, or just there's so many things there were so many barriers that were in families' ways at the time to really just go out and say, hey, I can work this 9 to 5. I can't work this 9 to 5 when I have a 6-year-old, doing work on a laptop at home. So it made it completely impossible for them to become stable. And we just know that the need is just going to continue to go and go. With the fact that, I'm a parent myself and my kids been, homeschooling for the past year, I can just imagine how other individuals are taking that, and how if you don't have a flexible job, or if you were working in an environment where you didn't have the capabilities of having a flexible job, I just can see how that would be a huge strain and a very large barrier in the household to become housing stable or secure.
Yeah, it sounds like childcare and access to childcare as well as, and in order for us to have a more equitable recovery, we need to focus on that, because the families who are most impacted by the pandemic, who are having probably a harder time finding a job because of the pandemic, are now having a hard time even looking for a job because they don't have access to childcare.
I need help with some.
Hear my kid in the background. Hold
Yeah,
on.
there you go. Right on cue. That's awesome. Nuishtamai, do you have any other, or Alisar?
I'll just add that affordable childcare is the key here, because there is childcare, but the issue and the biggest barrier is definitely affordable childcare.
Yeah.
Affordable childcare too, and also thinking about like the families who really want to go back to work, but they want to stay home and help their child through school. So trying to be available for their children to help them during the day, and also to be able to find jobs that they're able to work at night, but they also don't have childcare at night. So it's been kind of a barrier with some of our programs of like graduating them on and out of programs, because the pandemic has affected them so much. Either they're scared of bringing the pandemic home, they don't want to bring any of like the COVID stuff home to their own children, and they get sick. So it has been a fear within some of the services that we've had, is like we would love to help them get employment, but the employment offers that they have, they don't want to get COVID working in the service industry or any other industries like that and bring it home to their children.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. Although one thing that's a little bit heartening is that part of the efforts of the legislature this year was to make transformative investments in affordable childcare. So hopefully that can help start to alleviate some of these dynamics as well. How did you see Wellspring adapt to the needs of the families that they were serving? I think we've touched upon it previously as well. I'm more just fascinated with the fact that Wellspring is good at being dynamic and engaging communities. If there's something there that we can potentially help offer to other organizations, or as we kind of go through this pandemic recovery.
What I appreciate about this group of individuals that I work alongside in the housing department is how open and communicative we are when it comes to the needs of the communities that we serve. We look at this as a community aspect of seeing people as part of our community and not a service number. So not making this clinical, but making this a servitude of like, we have these opportunities available and we want to help you with them. How can we support you? And that's also like outreaching to schools and then letting them know everything that we do have. So making this an educational piece, going out to outreach events. So the pop-up drives that happen at schools where they pick up you know, either food or they pick up their homework, you know, that happens once a week. We try and be available at those as well. So we can give out resources for the baby boutique downstairs so families can get free clothing, or the ELC, the Early Learning Center, or even if we have available openings in any of our programs, so families will be able to ask any McKinney-Vento liaisons whether or not they can get referred into our programs. So it's really just the community engagement of being great collaborators with other providers to make sure like we're serving families.
Yeah, and then kind of moving on a little bit, one of the questions that I've heard from a lot of people actually is with the rental moratorium. You know, it's been extended a few times, but eventually there will be an end. And kind of curious to see, since you are providers on the grounds, what do you see as a result of what might happen once that comes to a close?
So,
No, go ahead.
oh, go ahead, Alazar.
I was only going to tell a quick story, but you can go first.
Well, I was going to say, just knowing the amount of rental assistance that's needed and just looking at the trends of the amount of rental assistance that is needed by household, we know that there is a large amount of individuals that are going to be in need of rental assistance. As soon as the moratorium is over, we know that if we don't have like a huge jump on paying down some of these past dues rents, like the last program ended in December of 2020, we're in May. So we know that households can potentially be, 5 months behind on rent, and this program is going to be able to cover up to, or there's no program currently right now that is outside of the Housing Justice Project's funding that they have that is actually addressing the concern. So we know that if the moratorium was to expire anytime near soon, like if it was to expire on June 30th, as it's supposed to, that there will be a large amount of individuals who will be flooding the courthouse with a pending eviction.
Yeah, and I want to add to that because what Kobe's saying is so true. We have a family right now with $13,000 in rental arrears from the start of COVID to today. And, this person, how are they going to pay off $13,000? I mean, it's a real issue. I'm very grateful for the moratorium. It did save a lot of families' situation, and it was very graceful, but it's also something that needs to be met head on for when it ends. And to the question that Troy posed in the chat, yes, there are some populations, at least in my programs, that are affected more than others. And I would talk about immigrants or refugees or families that are here possibly without legal work permits, because they've had the hardest time in finding jobs since the pandemic has started, and they don't have the same access to the same resources as green card holders or US citizens would have. So they've had just an enormously different pressure or situation in accessing food. For example, they don't get access to EBT, not unless you have a green card. So there's just a lot more barriers to their situation, and it's been definitely more difficult.
And I just want to read the question out loud because the people can't see the question. Are there any communities impacted to a higher degree than others due to the pandemic? And that's what Alisar was answering.
No, and that's a good point that you brought up in the very last one, Alisar, and communities that don't have access to the federal aid. In fact, the state legislature, before we left, allocated about $1.1 billion towards rental relief. And then in addition to that, there's about $340 million towards families who are not necessarily documented. So we're curious to see if there's ways to partner there as well. And just kind of on that question as well, and that are some communities impacted to a higher degree than others? Obviously the answer is yes, right? So we've seen that this pandemic has exacerbated inequities that we've already seen in our systems. And that's why it takes great organizations like Wellspring, but also changing the entire system to address these inequities that have persisted for so long. So again, thank you so much for all of your insight. And before we move on to any questions that we may have from the viewers, I saw that one came in. I was just curious to see, do you have any other thoughts that you'd provide, that you want to provide, or just kind of insights that you want to share with the audience today?
I think one question that I would probably want to ask us as a group is just if we could have done anything differently within the pandemic and we had unlimited resources, what would we have done differently? You know, when the pandemic first happened, one thing that I first thought of was like, there was a lot in the news about like, what are we going to do for middle class workers? What are we going to do for restaurants? What are we going to do for employees? How is this going to impact families? But there was hardly anything that I've heard on what are we going to do for homelessness within the county. That wasn't an immediate attention grabber. You know, a lot of places shut down, and I was working in Pioneer Square at the time when the pandemic first hit, and there was just not enough resources out there. Or the education aspect, you know, you got people who experiencing homelessness who don't have the ability to look at media or don't see it or are not up to date, you know, if they're living in tent cities or what have you. So my concern with like family homelessness working for Wellspring was like, if we have shelters that are at capacity and you have to spread them out because you have to make sure you're going by CDC guidelines, where are other families going? And like, that's still a question in my mind is like, where are families going? That makes me worry so much. But if I had unlimited resources, I would probably open up more shelters at the beginning of this for families. I would probably think about more graduation programs. I would think about more flexible funding for understanding what's going on when people are going through eviction and the moratorium and like more educational programs around it. Because we know what the moratorium is as service providers, but what does that mean to other people who are busy working a job and families who are taking care of their children who are going to school? What does that mean to them? How much information is getting out to the community? And like that is something that I'm always thinking about is like with the resources, if we had unlimited of them, or if we could get the resources we needed, then what would we be doing differently?
And to add exactly to what Nawishma is saying, the one thing that I would do differently if I had all the funds in the world and the decision-making power would be to just have opened up bathrooms and showers and hygiene facilities around the city, because we didn't really think about the fact that when we were closing down shelters for safety guidelines, we were closing down access for the homeless population to restrooms and showers and hygiene facilities. And we sort of took that away and didn't provide another resource that's also very traumatic. And that also added to a different level of trauma that the homeless population had to experience due to COVID.
Yeah, I would just piggyback what Alizar just said and just add to that and say, and to mention that a lot of the hygiene centers that were running prior to that were either defunded and volunteer ran, or were just completely gone, and there was already a minimal access to hygiene. So that is very important. And then just to add some sort of rental assistance and mortgage program that was continuous and through the pandemic. As we see, the need is clearly there. With the amount of evictions that we were able to prevent, and just knowing that we barely touched the surface just tells you how many people are expected to be housing insecure, to lose their housing, or to have a new housing barrier added to their already hard time of finding housing, and especially in Seattle. So that's what I would have kind of started.
No, that's
and not something that was after either. I do have to add that, because we did address the program. We did come up with a program, but it only supported after. I'm talking about something that provides an ease of mind that's ongoing, so that there's not a constant worry about whether or not I will be able to pay my rent, or whether or not there's going to be a program that can support me going forward.
Stronger basic needs program than investing in people before they become homeless and after. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that all that you said is pretty common sense, like pretty straightforward things that we could be doing literally today as well. So thank you so much for all of your insights and your thoughts today. I don't see any other questions in the audience, so I'll go ahead and start the closing remarks unless anybody else had feedback. I just want to say thank you so much for your commentary. And again, if nobody has anything else, you know, Nuish Chamai, Kobe, and Alistar, thank you so much for sharing your time and insights with us. You've been on the front lines of this challenging time, and you supported, what you said, Kobe, 50,000 plus people in the area.
5,100, yeah, 5,100 evictions. 5,100.
So you supported thousands of families in King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. And thank you so much for all you've done and doing every single day for families who are facing homelessness. And to all those watching, thank you for joining us, and thank you for supporting Wellspring Family Services. The Lasting Change campaign is truly about our community and doing all that we can to end the cycle of family homelessness. And it takes all of us to disrupt the cycle and create change. So please consider taking action today, supporting Wellspring Family Services. You can go and visit give.wellspringfs.org. And thank you to everyone. And we hope to see you all soon once we're all vaccinated and this pandemic has been left behind. So I'm Joe Nguyen, the state senator here in the 34th. And on behalf of Wellspring, have a wonderful week.